guys, so I've just moved house and I thought it would be a great opportunity for me to give you a tour of my own personal bookshelves, and then maybe you would like to post your bookshelves in a similar video beneath and we can get some really good book recommendations and give me a flavour of what your taste in reading is like. So let's get started. So here in my little snug, my little reading room, I have one of my very favourite books ever, I, Claudius. Claudius being the Roman emperor and Robert Graves being the war poet that we discuss on the course. It's a really beautiful novel and he really characterises Claudius, the narrator, very, very well. The relationships between characters are profoundly moving, but if you happen to be a fan of Game of Thrones, well, you can't do violence and political intrigue any better than the Julio-Claudian dynasty, quite frankly. So also on this bookshelf with some of my favourite things is a little bit of Tolkien, 2 copies of The Hobbit. Well, that's what happens when you have enough books. This kind of thing happens. The Silmarillion being J.R.R. Tolkien's magnum opus in his own estimation, although it was finished posthumously by his son Christopher, who edited it from a lot of boxes that were left lying around after his father died. So what else have I got here you might be interested in? Henry V, of course, always worth reading a historical play by Shakespeare. That is my great-grandmother. That's a little bit irrelevant to the course. Rudyard Kipling, a little bit of a controversial figure because of his association with colonialism, but If still remains one of the most famous poems in the English language. So here we have a bit of a Dickens collection. Dickens, of course, being sort of the most famous novelist in English. If you were going to start with Dickens, I wouldn't recommend any of these, actually. I would start with Oliver Twist. Got a bit more Harry Potter going because, of course, that has to be done. So sorry about the mess up in here. I actually didn't know how I was going to get all my books into the new house. I was at one point thinking if I brought one more book into this house, it might actually fall apart. So this is my music teaching room, and a lot of the books in here relate to music, but I had to start putting other books in here, otherwise they just, quite frankly, weren't going to fit anywhere. So let's see what we have in here that you might be interested in. Mary Stuart. If you're interested in English literature, it follows you might have an interest in English history. And Mary Stuart, Mary Queen of Scots, is obviously a fascinating figure within that. So what do we have in the corner here? James Joyce, Dubliners. Now, it's a series of short stories, but it really does represent Joyce's writing very well. So if you're interested in Irish literature, that's highly recommended. Let's have a little look in the corner here and see what treasures we can discover. A lot of these books were actually my grandparents. So see there we have the art of songwriting. Of course, I am a songwriter by profession, and I have a number of courses on music as well. The Casual Vacancy. Now, in the Harry Potter books, J.K. Rowling creates these really wonderful, relatable, likable characters. She does absolutely the opposite in The Casual Vacancy. She uses her knowledge of human nature to create characters that you're pretty much going to hate. Now here, much beloved from my childhood and maybe from yours, the Anne books, Anne of Green Gables by L.M. Montgomery. Probably the most famous Canadian writer. Oh, there's Oliver Twist that we were talking about earlier. It just takes me right back to childhood to read those. So I actually bought this set at Niagara Falls many years ago, being a touristy thing in Canada. So here we have the Old Curiosity Shop, Hard Times, a little bit more Dickens. I really should reunite that set together and shelve them a little bit better. So this is my bedroom bookcase, and here you get some of my very favourite books. 2 of my 3 copies of Lord of the Rings here. A lot of Tolkien, as you can see. I have more Tolkien than this, but it's just not all in the one place. English etymology. Etymology being the history of words. That was my father's, and I'm very fond of it. So I have here Herodotus's Histories, which I really think is an amazing book to read. Herodotus was in many ways a gullible chappie who got taken in by the ancient tourist stories, but it's still like reading Bill Bryson of the ancient world. You know, he has a great description of the pyramids, the way they looked before they fell into the state they're currently in. They apparently used to have all kinds of animals carved on them. You know, Herodotus allows you to see and visualize things like the pyramids, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. It's fascinating stuff. So here we have some world poetry. These books, all classics, were all given by my great aunts and uncles and my grandmother and my great grandparents to each other in Christmas 1940, which is why I have them all here. But there's a great collection of classics there. Oliver Twist, for example. You know, if you're new to English literature, that is a great way to introduce yourself to Dickens. On here we have a book by Colin Duries on the friendship between J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, which is a very moving story. Julian Barnes in the corner here, Arthur and George. Arthur being Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of the Sherlock Holmes series. That was actually a fascinating read and highly recommended. So this bookcase contains some real gems. Here we have The Lord of the Rings and the Complete Works of Shakespeare, because my nephew, aged 12, said that The Lord of the Rings and Shakespeare should definitely go together, side by side on the shelf. I was so proud. So 3 copies of The Lord of the Rings I have. I think having a copy of the Complete Works of Shakespeare in the house is a good idea, but it can be very difficult to read as the print is quite small. And if you're just beginning with Shakespeare, it's probably easier to start with, say, Macbeth or Romeo and Juliet as an individual text. So here you can see we have Anglo-Saxon poetry. That was, of course, part of my degree and my master's, where I specialised in Anglo-Saxon. And here, where is it? Robert Graves' Claudius the God. I should really put it side by side with I, Claudius. It's really good to consider I, Claudius and Claudius the God really as one coherent story in 2 parts. And sort of, I would recommend reading those back to back. And here we have Keats. So a little nod to the romantics there. Keats tends to be the really popular English poet. And probably if you haven't read a lot of English poetry, Keats might be a good place to start. And there, Heidi. If you're looking for a good children's book, you could do a lot worse than to read Heidi. So that concludes my tour of my bookshelves. I'm really interested to see yours now. So if you want to upload them to YouTube as maybe a private or unlisted video and post them here, or publicly if you want, or Dropbox links in the Q&A, it would be really great if we could get a discussion going.